Good evening to all. Welcome to Be Safe India International Webinar. Thanks for joining all participants and today's speaker.
Good evening to all. On behalf of BCF India, I, Marina Johnson, intern of BCF, privileged in introducing our today's speaker, Mr. Sunil Murlidhar Shastri, FRGS FRSA, Consultant Expert Speaker and Director, Ocean Governance Limited, UK. Sunil Murlidhar Shastri completed his Bachelor of Technology in Mining Engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. From 1981 to 1984, he worked as lecturer in mining in IIT Kharagpur. From 1984 to 88, he was ocean engineer in Mekong Limited, India. From 1989 to 1994, he was researcher in marine policy in the London School of Economics and Political Science. From 1994 to 2014, he worked as senior lecturer and associate professor in University of Hull and was member of Senate and Council. From 2018 to present, Sunil Murlidhar Shastri is a director, consultant, expert speaker, and independent consultant in ocean and environmental governance in the Ocean Governance Limited. He found his passion for PSM in Maribus in 1982 under the tutelage of Elizabeth Mann Burgess and has since made it his mission. He is best known internationally for his master classes and for his erudite analysis and candid opinions. Sunil has presented at various times the Indian Institute of Technology Kharagpur, International Ocean Institute, Aiken Technical University, Dalhousie University, London School of Economics and Harvard Kennedy School, supported throughout by prestigious scholarships. Sunil has previously been a university academic, consultant and researcher in marine and environmental policy and in mining and ocean engineering. He has served on several professional and public bodies as member, governor, or trustee. To highlight few of them are he was Director Governor Trustee in Pocklington School from 2016 to 8-17 and was member of Energy Institute from 1995 to 2017, member of Chatham House in 1996 to 2017, and he was member and trustee in the Greenwich Forum from 2008 to 2018. He also was Deputy Chairman, Director and Trustee in Commonwealth Argosy Foundation from 2016 to 2018. He was life member in Institution of Engineers of India since 1982, and he was also a life member in Mining Geological and Metallurgical Institute of India since 1982. He is Fellow in Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce since 2012 and also Fellow in Royal Geographic Society since 2011. And he is also a Rotary International Paul Harris Fellow. During this COVID-19, BCF extended the platform in connecting the eminent professionals, stakeholders, students, and public on this international webinar. We are delighted to connect our eminent speaker, Mr. Sunil Murlidhar Shastri, FRGS FRSA, Consultant Expert Speaker and Director, Ocean Governance Limited, United Kingdom, on this virtual forum and waiting to listen on environmental governance, three approaches to become an agent of change. Over to you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And it's my great pleasure to be presenting a talk on environmental governance, three approaches to becoming an agent of change. So this is really kind of my life's work, but I shall try to present it in about an hour or so. First of all, I want to thank Biodiversity Conservation Foundation, especially Mr. Kumar Guru, for giving me this opportunity to present my thoughts on this established platform of his, and also for a very, very kind introduction about me, which has gone quite a bit in details in my through my biodata. So I'm very grateful to you and very grateful to the organizers for that very kind introduction. Thank you very much also for the participants who are here. As always, I start my public talks with a tribute. All my public talks are are a tribute to my father, who was a public speaker, a great orator, and to Elizabeth Mann Borghese, who was my friend, philosopher, and guide. And I use her philosophy. I have used her philosophy in my work throughout my life in the last 30 years or so. My mother taught me to speak and much more. And she is listening to this and watching me speak from Pune, which is our home city, Pune in India. And my wife is also with my mother there. And my son is sitting here. So I have my family here with me or in Pune over there, some of whom are my long-term friends who go back to almost 50 years of friendships with people that I have known. So let me start by introducing my logo. And you can see on the logo 6 circles below ocean and environmental governance. And the 6 circles are people. The first circle represents people. You can see the 3 people there, man, woman, and probably a child. The second one is the planet, the globe, the earth, the planet, the only planet we have. There is no planet B, as they say. The third one is prosperity. And prosperity is defined in different terms, but it is the prosperity of the poorest of the poor. And that's what is important. And how can we achieve this equity between people, planet, and profit? That is through equitable distribution of work and resources, which will lead to, hopefully, justice and will lead to peace. So that is my basis of my work throughout my career in these long 30, 40 years. I first start off with this map here and a car. This is an iconic car called Ford Mustang. And the map is from California, and the route that is shown from San Francisco to San Diego is called the Pacific Central Highway. And it is a dream of many people who, first of all, want to go to California and also then want to drive this car on the Pacific Coastal Highway from the north to the south with the beach to your right-hand side. So this is an iconic route, but I'll leave this thought and I'll tell you the reason why I have put this slide here to start with. But let me start with the introduction of a concept of triptychs. What are triptychs? So this is a very famous triptych, and this triptych I call as silly money triptych, in the sense that this is a painting done by Monet. Monet was a famous impressionist painter, and he did this painting called Agapanthus triptych. You can see there are 3 slides, as it were, 3 large, very, very large slides of painting there. And that's a triptych. Triptych is a way to convey a thought or an idea or a philosophy, because people remember things in 3 much easier than in 5s or 10s or whatever. So 3 ideas at a time is always useful. Now this I call silly money because this painting was sold for something like $150 million in Sotheby's not too long ago. So I call that as an expensive triptych. The next triptych is this concept of how to divide our daily life into these 3 slots. 8-hour slot for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. So basically work for 8 hours, sleep for 8 hours, and then do our recreational activities, etc., spend time with family, etc., for 8 hours. So this concept came from the utopian socialist Robert Owen in 1870. Before that, the working hours for people could be 12 hours, 16 hours, whatever, and there was no regulation on working hours. So he was the first person who tried to bring in this 8-hour working shift, as it were. Now, I call this as a revolutionary triptych. So there is an expensive triptych and a revolutionary triptych. So I want to, taking from there, I want to introduce some of my own triptychs. And my own triptychs may not be as expensive or as revolutionary, but I hope they are as useful as they can possibly be. So first one, and I'll go through these very quickly, issue, driver, and approaches. So issues are positive. Issues are the ones that are affecting us. So for example, poverty. or environment or global climate change and so on. So those are the issues. The drivers are the positive and the negative drivers, things that we do, mainly the anthropogenic influences that make them positive or negative. And what are approaches to deal with those issues? The second one, which is my subject of talk today, is advice, advocacy, and action. This is how I have divided my life in. Advice is what I do for earning a living through my consultancy. Advocacy is what I do as a pro bono work. For example, the talk I am doing today for BCF is part of my advocacy. So that people listen to the ideas that I have, and perhaps the BCF can incorporate some of those ideas, and I can incorporate some of the ideas of the BCF in my work. The third one is action, whereby I use some of my own money in order to try to bring some small change in a small way, as in as tiny way as possible, but as effective manner as possible. And then there are, of course, we have the situation, particularly in India, where we are a democracy. We have a demography in terms of a large population, which is young. In fact, 65% of India's population today is under 30 years of age. And demand, there is a demand for everything that we can manufacture. So this whole idea of made in India or make in India, that has got tremendous support if we can manufacture quality goods. So whatever you can manufacture, if you keep quality in it, and if you have if you meet the demand of the people, then there is no shortage of public choice for the products that you make. But of course, this can also help in population, poverty, and pollution. So you are basically trying to create these situations whereby you can help your population to get healthy, your poverty to be alleviated, and pollution to be reduced. And then, of course, this can then address the problems that we have, particularly in India, of death, disease, and destruction. And this has become much more clear now in these days of COVID-19 and the aftermath of it. And of course, the other aspect is we'll talk about environment, what is governance, and what is change. But the key thing that I will talk about when I talk of science and technology is this whole concept of imagine, thinking, and creation. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I mentioned people, planet, and profit, and equity, justice, and peace in my introduction to my logo. So the important thing to remember is whenever you want to bring about a change, there's nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous than to initiate a new order of things. This was a quote by Niccolo Machiavelli, a famous political philosopher. Now, any time you want to bring change, there'll be a lot of opposition. And that is where the person has to be very careful in terms of working in such a way that the opposition is minimized and the support is maximized. So a mandatory joke, as it were, the great Dalai Lama goes into a pizza shop and he orders a pizza parlor and orders a pizza. So the person who is serving, he says, what sort of pizza would you like, sir? And in his very philosophical kind of way, and a tongue-in-cheek approach that he has, as some of you who have seen his videos will know, he says, make me one with everything, in a very philosophical way. Anyway, he pays for the pizza with $20 and waits for the pizza. After some time, the pizza is given to him, but he's holding the pizza in his hand, but there is no change. So he waits for a minute or two, and then he says, excuse me, but what about my change? And the young man there, he says, sir, the change must come from within. So I think that's the important message that we must take, that the change that you want to see in the world, and this quote is famously accredited to Mahatma Gandhi, but the change you want to see in the world must come from yourself. That's the key message that I want to give in this talk. And whether you want to follow the Mahatma Gandhi's quote that is said here, or you want to listen to pop music and follow the song by Michael Jackson, where he talks of man in the mirror. So man in the mirror or woman in the mirror is a person that is you. You are looking at yourself. So if you want to change the world, it's the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror that you want to change. And that's an important point that I want to make here too. Then I said I will talk about government and governance. So I want to very quickly talk about what is government and what is governance. So governance is the entity, and government is the entity, and governance is the process of doing it. It is a new buzzword in development discourse. So what are the aspects of government and governance? So public sector management, transparency, legal framework, accountability, information, etc. are the key components of governance. And at an individual level, if you want to have a good governance, if you want to have a person at the top of good governance or a good government, then you must have inculcate these principles of selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. So these are very important principles that we must inculcate in an individual and in an organization. And of course, the governance architecture must achieve a horizontal and vertical integration, both from top to bottom, also from bottom to top. So both ways, it must work from bottom to top and top to bottom. It must be multi-scalar, it must be macro to micro, so big to small to micro, and multi-level, local level, grassroots level, as we call it, to regional level, and all the way up to the what we call as the global level. So local level can be cities, towns, villages, etc. Regional can be your own region, the state, etc. In Indian context, let's say Kerala or Maharashtra or Punjab or whatever. So that would be regional. Global could be the, national. Again, you can have larger regions. So Asia could be a larger region, and global would be United Nations level, all the countries of all the 193 countries of the world. The change in governance is in our times is best capsulated like this. Mahatma Gandhi famously, when he went for these roundtable conferences, Louis Fisher, the famous American reporter who wrote his biography, he asked Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? And Mr. Gandhi replied, that would be a splendid idea. So the blind following of Western civilization is not going to help us in achieving good governance. Good governance has to be achieved based on adapting the best policies in our local situation. And that's an important aspect when I talked about local to regional to global and vice versa, global to regional to local. So both those aspects are very important. So I want to start with my first sort of approach. I have said there are three approaches or three approaches to become an agent of change. So the first approach I have adopted throughout my life is what I call as advice. And advice is basically this idea of giving my ideas to people who will listen to me and people who will follow my advice or follow my guidance. And these could be clients that I use, which could be starting from governments, private corporations, educational institutions, and academic programs. So I give advice in these based on these 7 pillars of governance, which I will talk about one by one very briefly. But the more important thing here is this is my vehicle for earning a living, as I have told you before. So this is how I make a living, and I have made my living for several decades now using this masterclass and other pillars of seven pillars of ocean governance. So I will go through them one by one as we talk about, and this is my sort of largest contribution to today's talk. So first one is science and technology. Science and technology, I see it as a quest for knowledge and acquiring wisdom. Science is knowledge and technology is wisdom. Because again, I told you about the positive and the negative aspects of it, the drivers. So science is a positive driver, it's also a negative driver. Because we know that science contributes to a lot of negative. Science has contributed, for example, to pollution. Science has contributed to overfishing. Science has contributed to climate change because scientific developments have meant that we are using the resources in an inordinate manner. But it's the same science that can tell you the positive ways of changing the environment back again to a good environment. And combating climate change, for example, or combating global sea level rise. So basically, how can we convert our knowledge into wise use? A fine example of this would be nuclear science and nuclear technology. So obviously nuclear science is knowledge, but nuclear technology, what do you use? What do you do with nuclear science? would be the wisdom side. So whether you use it for nuclear detonations and atomic bombs, or whether you use it for nuclear medicine or nuclear energy. So those are the important things. And the question here is about this known known. So things that we know that we know. So those are the things that we have learned through science. But the more important question is the known unknowns. So the things that we know that we don't know. And that's what we want to work on. But more importantly, as a scientist, you want to work on the unknown unknown, the things that we don't even know that we don't know. But in between, there is this unknown unknown, which I have put in question marks. And that is where the problem of arrogance comes in. Sometimes we know things, but we pretend that we don't know things. For example, this issue of climate change and global warming. People know about it, but people don't want to do anything about it, and they want to ignore it. And that's where this unknown knowns comes in. And that is where this whole idea of imagine, think, create, which comes in. So imagination is unbounded. As Einstein famously said, that knowledge is limited, imagination is unlimited, which is why imagination is very important. And imagination is about dreaming. And dreams, not the kind of dreams that you dream when you sleep, but those that won't let you sleep. So these are the things that you must work hard during your waking hours. So these are your daydreams, as it were, but they are contributing to change. They're contributing to imagination. They create, and then imagination will eventually lead to thinking about, oh, I imagined this great thing about going to the moon, or going to the bottom of the sea. But how can you actually do it? And then people think about it, and then people actually create. And in fact, this is the motto of the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is the United Nations organization. And their motto is imagine, think, create. And of course, some cynics might say that modern technology owns ecology and apology, but that is not true. In fact, it's modern technology that is going to make life better. And don't ever believe people when they tell you that life was better in their father's generation, or if their father tells you or grandfather tells you that life was so much better when we were young. No. Humanity as a whole is much better today than it ever was in our entire history of humanity. It's a double-edged sword, science and technology. It leads to global environmental issues, but it also provides us with solutions. So dreaming, utopianism is very important, because utopians of today are realists of tomorrow, and realists of today are dead tomorrow. That's what my mentor, Elizabeth Borghese, often used to say. The next pillar is geopolitical economy. It's about economy. It's about where you produce things and where you consume things. Who benefits from our resources? The development and the beneficiaries. Where do you develop the resources, and who are the beneficiaries? Many times what happens is the costs are all socialized, but the privatization of the benefits takes place. The simple example of that is when you have, let's say, I'll give you an example of a herd of cows. When you have a herd of cows, what you're doing is you are taking all the benefits. You're milking the cows, and you're selling the milk, and you're making cheese and butter or everything out of it, and making a lot of money out of it. That time you don't go to the government and say, because I'm making a lot of money, please take more taxes from me. But as soon as your cows start dying of disease, foot and mouth disease, for example, famously in this country, then you will run to the government and say, oh, my herd of cows of 500 cows has suddenly died, and please help me. So that is where the problem of socialization of costs and privatization of benefits comes, and that has got to be avoided. And of course, carbon trail from production to consumption to residue. Everything we do has a residue and has an impact on carbon trail and carbon footprint, and how to reduce that to the extent possible. We have to also understand the transboundary nature of impacts. Pollution on land, air, and sea. In fact, we have now created disasters. The disasters, for example, the Boxing Day tsunami, and sadly epidemics like the one that we are experiencing now and going through the pandemic of COVID-19. These are examples of transboundary impacts of natural phenomena. So it's not just limited to a region or a country. When something happens in this world, we are a globalized world, and anything happens to this world, it affects the rest of the world. The COVID-19 is a phenomena that has multiplied because we travel, and when we travel, we pass on this virus from one person to the other. And of course, this can be worse if it is transmitted through animals, and we have experienced those also through things like SARS, etc. And we have to learn to remain within environmental limits. animals remain within their environmental limits. There's a famous schoolyard joke which says, or a quiz which says, why don't polar bears eat penguins? Because polar bears live in the North Pole and penguins are in the South, and never the twain shall meet. And that's because they live and they follow their environmental limits. Birds fly in the sky and fish are in the water, and animals live on land. But we human beings want to be everywhere, and that is where the problem is. So we are not living within our environmental limits. So that's the aspect that we want to think about. Economy, you have to remember always this. Herman Daly is a very famous environmental economist, and he says that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not vice versa. The third one is institutions and organizations, and we want to build democratic institutions. I mentioned India as a democracy, which is a very good thing. And democracy, although it is said that it's the worst form of government as we experience this from time to time, but except the others that all have been tried, all the other forms of governments have been worse than democracy. So we have to improve our democracy to the extent possible. Voting, not veto, preferably consensus, agreeing on issues is very important. It is important to deal with easier issues, more amicable issues, in order to build confidence through consensus and then go on to the more complicated and more nuanced issues. And the key thing is to move out of file, move out of bureaucracy and move into life, which is action. So files must be converted into life, and less government and more governance. There must be less, bureaucracy, and there must be more delivery. So those are the very important aspects of institutions and organizations. The beauty of democracy is that it somehow creates an ecosystem of checks and balances. Checks and balances. You have the Supreme Court, that's a check. You have the Central Bureau of Investigation, that's a check. You have the judiciary, that's a check. You have the executive, that's a check. So there are any number of checks. There is a press, the journalists, they are a check. So everything can be a check on democracy, and that these institutions will make sure that the democracy works in the manner that it should, and should be useful for people. Then lawmaking, legislation and implementation. How to make laws and how to implement them. The important aspect of law must be continuous development. The law must be developed continuously. There must be a periodic review, and there must be a uniform application of the rule of law. Environmental law, for example, is one of the fastest growing disciplines of international law in the world today. So we have what we call as peremptory norms, that is, norms that we are trying to establish in environmental law, that pollution is a crime against environment. This is called jus cogens in law, in Latin. So peremptory norms are those norms that we cannot discuss or debate. That means they are taken as accepted, taken as granted. So when we say genocide is a crime against humanity, there is no debate or discussion about it. Similarly, we are trying to bring, as environmentalists, we are trying to say that pollution is a crime against the environment, just as genocide is a crime against humanity. Then exhortative principles. Do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. This is one of my mottos. Rights and duties must go together. And we must do the right things because they are the right things to do, not because they are convenient, not because they are cheap, not because they are popular, but you must do the right things because they are the right thing to do. And the important message to take here is covenant without the sword are but words. Now, this is an old philosophy of crime and punishment, but we are shifting from that. What we are saying is, let us not go into the business of polluter pays principle, where a polluter is punished. So you commit a crime and you are punished for the crime. But we are trying to move, the environmental law is trying to move into a scenario where the precautionary principle is used. So we are saying that let us avoid committing the crime in the first place. Let us avoid committing the damage to the environment in the first place, rather than waiting for the damage to be committed and then make the polluter pay. So similarly, I mean, there is a famous, Nuclear Liability Convention, which came in 1960s, whereas the Nuclear Safety Convention has come in the 1990s. This should be the other way around. nuclear safety must come first and nuclear liability must follow. I always give this example because Homer Simpson, the famous cartoon character, is a nuclear worker, and I'm concerned about his safety more than his liability to the damage that he might be doing. So our world is getting increasingly lawless. This is a new phrase that I have coined. I call it our world is getting lawless because our lands are getting more unfertile, our air is getting polluted, and our water is getting polluted. So our water is getting polluted, and in fact, water depletion is happening. There is water scarcity in many parts of India, as we know. In fact, in India, and I'll come back to water a little bit later, air pollution is rampant in many cities in India. In fact, some of the top 10 cities in the world in terms of air pollution are in India. And of course, our land is getting less and less productive. And more importantly, our lands are getting converted into deserts. That's the other problem that we have because of lack of vegetation. So the next pillar that I have is stakeholder engagement. And who are stakeholders? And there is a list here which is given by Agenda 21 of the United Nations in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Women and children. So that's the first. So it is important to remember that women who form the 50% of the world we live in must have 50% of the right to say in everything. And children and youth are very important because they are the future of the world. So the future world, they will be inhabiting not people like me. People like me will be long gone, and the children of today will be inhabiting the world, and they are the stakeholders. And then there is the other range of stakeholders, which is indigenous people, non-governmental organizations like the BCF, local authorities, trade unions, business and industry, science and technology, and farmers. But and I mentioned about this, and my tweets nowadays have this hashtag which I use. Women will work wonders worldwide, and we are seeing that already. We have already seen the example of this in COVID. That the countries which are women led, which have women chief ministers, women prime ministers, and women presidents have done the best in terms of containing the COVID crisis. And the role of civil society. Governments, non-governmental organizations, industry, commerce, you and I, we are all part of this stakeholder engagement, and we are all stakeholders. We talk of corporate social responsibility. That means all the corporations must give back to where they get it. So because they earn their money, they earn their profits from the land, local land, so they must give back to the local people, local land and local people. But that is not the only thing. It's not just the corporate social responsibility. It is the individual social responsibility that is of all of us, all the stakeholders. As John Donne famously said, no man is an island, no woman is an island, but we have created our own. We have created our own islands. We think each one of us is important. We think a farmer is important. We think a politician is important. A scientist thinks they are important. A policymaker thinks they are important. But they're all related. Position, issues, and needs. We take very, very solitary positions, but the issues are common and the needs are even more common. What are our needs? Roti, kapda, and makan, as famously Indira Gandhi used to say. That is a need for everybody. So our needs are very, very common. And again, as Mick Jagger, the famous Rolling Stones, says, you can always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you find you can get what you need. So what you want and what you need are very different things. Every time I personally, when I say that I want something, I think, do I really need it? And that's where that car simile comes in. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But Mahatma Gandhi very famously has been attributed this quote, and he says that there is enough in the world for the need of everybody, but not enough in the world for the greed of anybody. Now he talks of greed as want, and need is the need. So it is very important to distinguish between what you want and what you need. And really, it is the need that we must focus on and not the wants. So going on from that idea of stakeholder engagement, environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens. And that is all of us. And all of us individually and collectively. You, me, organizations, non-governmental organizations, governmental organizations, Everybody is part of this whole thing. And this comes from the principle 10 of Rio Declaration of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the Rio Conference in 1992. And then, of course, I mentioned, of course, that the philosophy must be do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. But then to do the right thing, we need money. And how to get money to do the good thing that you want to do. And there are these various mechanisms by which you can get money. There are public-private partnerships, there are private finance initiatives, foreign direct investment, multilateral development and financial institutions, including the World Bank and the World Bank Group. And of course, there are the regional development banks, such as the European Bank for Regional Development, and there is the Asian African Development Bank, Latin American Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and the Asian Development Bank. And of course, there is a global environment facility by the World Bank, which provides matching grants for incremental environmental amelioration. So if you make the environment better, if you show, for example, that your processes are saving X tons of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, then the improvement that you made, whatever amount of money that improvement cost you, that money can be matched by the global environmental facility of the World Bank. So it's a very useful and fascinating facility, because what it is doing is it will give you matching grants for every environmental amelioration effort that you make through improvement of technology, through improvement of processes, etc. So the key question the key point to remember here is enterprises or organizations do stuff to make money. They create things to make money, whereas the environmentalists need money to do stuff. So that's an important point to remember. So we need the money, so we must find ways of getting that money from those mechanisms that I have mentioned earlier. And of course, I come to the seventh and the most important pillar of my of governance as far as my definition goes, and I'm talking about education awareness. And I spent most of my life as an academic, as a university academic, and particularly focusing on postgraduate education, because again, undergraduate education is very important, but undergraduate education is very generic, and PhD, or what we call as doctoral education, is very individualistic, whereas postgraduate education is a very evolving mechanism, and I'm very committed to postgraduate studies, particularly postgraduate studies and internationalization of postgraduate studies. So, and of course, I don't want to just focus on formal education, both formal and informal education. My mentor, Elizabeth Mann-Borghese, used to talk of children from 8 to 80. Now, 8-year-old are children, we can understand. How can 80-year-olds be children? 80 means whatever age you are, doesn't matter what age you are. You must be curious, you must be eager to learn. My mother is 89, and she can now still use iPad, and she can send emails, and she can send WhatsApp and download videos and do all sorts of stuff, browse the internet. So curiosity, she's ready to learn. Today, if some young lady or some young person comes and says, oh, how to cook this or how to make this craft or something, she's very keen to learn that. So the curiosity and inquisitiveness is a criteria that we must not lose. As soon as we lose curiosity, we are good to die. I think that's the point, we should be dead. There's a very famous picture of Einstein in the Natural Museum, in History Museum, Science Museum in Washington, D.C., where Einstein, having won this Nobel Prize and everything, is watching like a child at a self-inverting top. The one that you tie a rope around and throw it, and then it keeps on spinning. And this particular top it appends itself. And he just, he's amazed. He's this tongue sticking out like a little child, and he's looking at that. And then he goes back home, and then to Princeton, and writes this equation for how this happens, So that's the kind of curiosity you have to maintain. You cannot say that I've been there, done it all, got Nobel Prize, and what do I need to know? I know everything. No, that's not the idea. Your curiosity, inquisitiveness must be nurtured the whole time, all your life. Training at all levels, particularly mid-career politicians, including civil servants and politicians and lawyers. It's very important that these people are educated from time to time during their career. contribution to a work of range of organizations, local to global, in the area of governance. And that is how you can, you can spread the word, spread the good word, as it were. And of course, facilitation of stakeholder dialogue. These are some of the things that I do. I have been doing. Mediation and arbitration is an area which is very important, rather than litigation, because that takes a long time. So it's a good idea to get two people together and get them talking. Communication is much better than conflict, because conflict is expensive. Communication is cheap. Communication will lead to better results. Promoting awareness to speaking engagements like the one that I'm doing now. And it's a wealth. Education, the one thing to remember about wealth, education, it is a wealth that grows when you give it away. Because the reason is, I always tell my students, from every student, every cohort of student, every batch of students, I learn more than possibly they learn from me. Because when they ask me a question, and you will be asking me questions at the end of the talk, I will know some answers. I will not know many answers, but then that will make me go back to read more, to learn more, to research more, and then come back the next time and give the answers to the questions that I could not answer. And that is very important. So my knowledge is increasing when I give it away. And that is the truth of education. For any educator, that's the greatest satisfaction, that you are learning more than you give away. So in the end, this is Baba Dioum, a very famous Senegalese engineer, and he said he's made this connection between what we conserve, what we protect, and what we are taught. And he says that in the end, we will conserve only what we love. We love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. So there's this great connection between your teachers and students and what they will protect. So when we talk of environmental conservation, you have to start young. You have to start them at school level, at primary school level, at kindergarten level, and then bring them up as environmental conservationists through the education. Because it's the education that will make people understand things and not be bigoted about ideas, and then they will start loving things and they will start conserving things. This brings me to the end of my first aspect, but before I introduce my second aspect, I want to introduce what are known as the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these Sustainable Development Goals were released by the United Nations in 2015. Earlier, we had the Millennium Development Goals. There were the 7 Millennium Development Goals, and these have been taken over by this, what we call as Sustainable Development Goals. Now, if you look at them, and many of you may be aware of these are like what the Americans would call motherhood and apple pie. Nobody can deny that these are the good outcomes. We all want to see these outcomes: no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and so on. We want to see all these things happening in the world. But again, how can you see these things happening in reality on ground level? I'm very glad to say, for example, that I've been following this very, very acutely, or very, very, very keenly, that the number of people who have access to potable drinking water is now becoming better. So this is a great improvement that these Sustainable Development Goals or the Millennium Development Goals have achieved. If you go into Worldometer, there's a site called worldometer.info. It will tell you how things are improving, and one of this is clean water and sanitation. And the number of people who are benefiting from clean water and improved sanitation is getting better and better. So it used to be a billion roughly about a couple of years ago, and now it's at about 700,000 or so. So it's very important that these Sustainable Development Goals are, and each one of us can contribute to these Sustainable Development Goals in our little way. So I come to my second aspect, which is my pro bono work. That means the work for which I do it because I enjoy doing it. I do it because it follows the same philosophy that I follow. So, for example, speaking to BCF today is what we call as advocacy, speaking at a platform for BCF. And one of my main advocacies, and there are one or two I'll mention right now. The first and the most important one is it is our ethical duty to give. we talk of corporate social responsibility, we have to also think in terms of individual social responsibility, and that's where this comes in. But I want to very quickly mention this concept of point 7. Point 7, and I've got this 7 theme running throughout my talk. So point 7 is a 1970s voluntary contribution commitment by the OECD countries, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the 38 richest countries in the world, for ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, call it aid, to give aid to the rest of the world. Now, 38, this figure changed now. So the 38 OECD's commitment is a similar membership as the NATO membership. But so that shows now that we are spending so much more on defense. 3% is the average expenditure of countries on defense, and we are not able to give 0.7 to the poor people in the world. So this is where the contradiction is, and this is where Singer, the famous Peter Singer, who is an environmental philosopher, he has given a Singer test, and the Singer test. This is where my car comes in. So I will, instead of giving the Singer test, I will give you the Shastri test, and the Shastri test is simple. When I first went to California, and I had heard about this, I had heard of the Ford Mustang car, and I had heard about the Pacific Coastal Highway, and I knew that it was very iconic to drive this car from north to south and enjoy the scenery at a slow speed, going this very iconic car. But then that time I didn't have the money to do it. The next several trips when I went to California, then I found that I didn't have the time, or maybe I had the time, but I didn't have the money, or I had the money, but I didn't have the time. Most recent visits that I have made California, I have the time and I have the money. But then I think to myself, do I really need to do this? I want to do it, yes, but do I really need to do it? And that's where this dilemma of want and need comes in. And you have to choose not want, but you have to choose the need. And then the money that you save is the money that you can give away. That is the message. So what does this mean in terms of resource terms? Jeffrey Sachs, a very famous economist who is at Columbia now, he used to be at Harvard. In fact, he was a director of one of the programs that I attended at Harvard on environmental economics and policy analysis about 25 years ago. And he has written a book, and he says that if all the rich countries contribute 0.7% to development aid, then it can do year after year deal with death, disease, and destruction. It will contribute to something of the order of $300 billion every year. And this will probably mean dealing with all these kind of pandemic situations, etc. But not more importantly, it will service the sustainable development goals, the 17 sustainable goals that need money to service them. And more importantly, and most importantly, natural disaster mitigation. Every year, we have natural disasters, and they are getting more in numbers and more frequent in number, and also more intense. And natural disaster mitigation can also be helped by this 0.7 aid. You'll be surprised to know that United States, which is the single largest donor country in the world, they only give 0.1% of their GDP to overseas development. They are a big country, they are a big economy, so the 0.1% is big, but they are not giving 0.7%, they are just giving 0.1. The only countries that meet that 0.7 or exceed it are the Scandinavian countries. And this is something for us to think. Even India now, which is becoming a rich country, should consider helping the have-nots, or even within the country. So again, the quote here is very relevant. So to those that hunger, give bread. So that's the aid bit. But then to those who have bread, give them hunger for justice. And that is very important. Once your stomachs are full, you must uprise and you must rise for justice, because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We have to remember that. So my third point, which is where I use my money, my own money, and not a lot of it, because I don't earn a lot, so I don't have a lot. but I have decided for the last 20 years that I will give 10% of my income to charity. And charity is not some big Oxfam or some, Amnesty International or something like that. Little bit of money that I know is going to the right place, to the right people, to do some little bit of good. Maybe, buying books for children, maybe cleaning up some place here or something like that, or providing water, sanitation to some people. So 7 in 10 of India's population have too little water or lack of clean drinking water and improved sanitation. And I mentioned that the situation is going to get much worse in India. We have already heard that temperatures in some places in India are going to over 50 on a regular basis, 50 degrees centigrade. And more importantly, I also read recently somewhere that there are only 2 countries where you have running water, 2 cities in India where you have running water. One is Kota in Rajasthan, and another is, I think, Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala. So there are only 2 places in the entire country where you have running water. And this is going to this situation. There are places I know. I come from Maharashtra, and many of my relatives live in the Marathwada region of Maharashtra, where you get water once in 2 weeks in municipal taps. Okay, so it's a very dire situation for water, and we have to work on it. And the solution, the entire time, if you can't do anything else, just plant trees. Planting trees is the best solution for many of the evils that are facing our environment today. Of course, and I'm talking about women and the 50% of the population of the world. Much of women's life is spent in collecting firewood and water, leaving them very little time for any chance of self-improvement or self-advancement. No time for advanced education, learning, acquiring some skills. So none of that. All they're doing is getting up in the morning and going 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers away, getting some water and firewood. And again, we have problems in many parts of the world, including in India, particularly in coastal countries, where water, there's lots of water, there's sea water, obviously, or rainwater, and there's lots of rainwater, which becomes floods half the time. Other times there's no rain and we have no water and there's droughts. And then we have coastal floods. So we have water everywhere, which is contaminated water because of flooding and because of excessive use of fertilizers and chemicals. And rainwater, even the rainwater as it falls from the skies, it is contaminated because of the pollution in the sky. And of course, the wrong kind of water, too much water or too little water also, particularly in the coastal areas and coastal flooding, and of course in small island countries, which are under particular threat of what we call as sea level rise. So we don't see change when it's happening. That's an important thing to remember. Changes take a long time. Sometimes changes take 100 years. Social changes, technological science and technology is quicker in changing, but changing that science and technology to wisdom, changing that science and technology to policy is not an immediate thing. It is slow. And we have to be patient, and we have to be infinitely patient. I am always enthused by people like David Attenborough, or people like Sylvia Earle, who are in their 80s and 90s, and they have seen so much damage to the environment happening in their life. In my own life, when I was born in 1955, the CO2 ppm parts per million was 313. In 1800, it was 283. So from 1800 to 1955, it went up by 30. And today it is 415. It has gone up by 102 in my lifetime. So if you want to bring about changes to reverse this, it is not going to happen overnight, but we have to work at it. We have to chip at it all the time. So before I finish, I'm coming to the end of my talk. I want to tell you a little story, how each of us can be an agent of change and make a difference. How I have done, I have told you. How I have been trying to be an agent of change in my life. This is a story of the boy, the beach, the old man, and the starfish. So there's a boy walking on the beach on a hot day. and the beach is strewn with starfish. And day is going to get very hot, and the starfish will be boiled to death on the beach because of the high temperature. So the boy is picking up a starfish one at a time and chucking it into the sea. And he keeps doing that. He keeps picking up a starfish and chucking it into the sea. There's an old man passing by, and he says, "Young man, what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm saving this starfish. I'm protecting this starfish. I'm making a difference. I'm making a change for this starfish." And the man says, "The beaches of this particular beach and the beaches of the world are strewn with starfish. What difference are you going to make to them?" He says, he picks up another starfish and throws it in the sea and says, "It made a difference to that one." And it is very important that we make a difference to one person, to 10 people, to 5 people, to the extent that we can make. And we make a difference in a manner that we can make to improve the environment. We plant 1 tree, 20 trees, 10 trees, whatever. But I think that's the key message that I want to give. So, and when you start on this journey of change, people will laugh at you, they will ignore you, they will fight you. But if you chip at it, if you carry on working at it, if you keep on slowly chipping at it, in the end, you will win. So that's my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for inviting me for this on this occasion to speak. I hope my talk was useful. But before I end, once again, let me remind you of my logo. Let me remind you of ocean and environmental governance. Of course, the people, number 1, first circle, second circle, the planet, the third circle, prosperity, the fourth circle, equity, the fifth circle, justice, the final one, achievement, is peace, achieving peace. Pacem in maribus, pacem in terra. Peace in the oceans, peace on earth. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil ji. You did a wonderful presentation. Thank you for all participants who have joined today BCF India International Webinar. Thank you, Mr. Sunil ji. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you.